Thanks for the very kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about InterTubes, which is a study of the US long-haul fiber optic infrastructure, and this is a joint work with my advisor, Professor Paul Barford. So the internet, as we all know, is the most gigantic complex infrastructure ever built by human beings, where different technologies, applications, and designs like software-defined networking, cloud computing, data centers, mobile computing, etc. thrive and coexist. And one thing we all assume is that the physical infrastructure that we have today will have the capacity, resilience, and robustness required to support all these aforementioned technologies and applications. And despite some many years of topology research that people have been doing, we don't have a complete picture of the internet in terms of the physical connectivity. And we also have no answers to these following questions, like what does the internet's underlying physical infrastructure look like? How resilient is this infrastructure to accidents like cable cuts? And say I'm an ISP, how can I broaden the perspective of risks in my network using such topology maps? What are the right and wrong conduit deployment policies that I can follow so that I can avoid all those risks in my network? And finally, how can I broaden the perspective that I gain and use that to improve the topological characteristics as well as the performance in my network? I'm going to put it in a nutshell and say that despite some 20 years of topology research, we don't have a complete picture of the physical internet. And this includes things like AS level topology, router level topology, etc. So to unravel the structural complexity, we did this study called InterTubes, because before the study, all we had was a series of tubes, and this is much exemplified by the ridicule metaphor that late Senator Ted Stevens made. So I'm going to explain InterTubes by talking about these set of points. So I'm going to first talk about the process that we use to create a reproducible map of the internet, followed by an assessment of one of the characteristics that we found in the constructed map, which is infrastructure sharing. And we're going to propose a set of solutions to mitigate the problem that arises because of infrastructure sharing, and what are all the implications for researchers, network operators, etc. And finally, I'm going to conclude this talk by talking about a case study that we did a couple of months ago. All right, on to the first step, which is the process for constructing a reproducible map of the internet. So this is a 4-step process where we start by building an initial map of the internet. And for building this initial map, we're going to look at the maps that are published by service providers in their websites. So these are properly geocoded maps that has all the conduit information published in the ISP's website. So we're going to leverage that and create an initial map. So that's the step one. And whatever we do as researchers, we have to validate the procedure, right? So we're going to look at the public records that are published in internet, like right-of-way information, agency filings, fiber IRUs, etc., to validate whatever we construct in step one. And then there are other maps that do not have properly geocoded information, including Sprint's map, for instance, that just tells you the POP information and not the line of sight connectivity beyond that, right? So we're going to use that map on top of this and then infer conduit sharing for all the maps constructed using the same set of public records. So here is an example of what we do. So this is Zayo's map that has been published in Zayo's website, and it lists all the conduit information along with the colo facilities maintained by Zayo. So as part of this project, we developed a rich suite of tools that can take any format that has been published in the ISP's website and then extract the information out of it. So here is the map that is extracted from the Zayo's website. And this is still not geocoded. So what we are going to do to geocode that is to project this on top of ArcGIS and then manually annotate this map. So this will give you the exact picture of the conduits that Zayo has. And we repeat this process for 20 maps that we consider in the study to create this first of its kind internet map. So before this, like in the last 25 years of topology research, we were never able to produce one such map. So to show you an example of how we validate this map, so here is a pointer, right? This points between the link in Denver and Greeley. So what we do to validate this is we go into the internet search and we search for Denver to Greeley AT&T fiber IRU. Out of the many documents that has been listed from the results, we see this one particular information. What it says is that Zayo actually agrees to repair all the damages caused by Zayo when it is installing the conduit into the city duct system, as well as it shares the conduit with other ISPs like Brand, Level 3, Quest, Comcast, etc. So this tells you two things. One is the internet infrastructure is mostly co-located with the right-of-way information, offering a hint, as well as it shares the conduit information with all the conduits with other ISPs. Right? And here is another example. So this points the link between Arlington and Richmond in Virginia. Again, we go into the internet search and we search for Arlington to Richmond, fiber IRU, level 3, AT&T, etc. And then out of the many documents, we find this hint in the internet, which tells you the fact that ISPs like AT&T, level 3, WorldCom, and Quest, which are acquired by others, actually share a link between Arlington and Richmond in all these 4 regions. So this again is a hint that we use to validate this map, and we validate all the 542 links that we have in our dataset. Some of the other details that we have in the constructed map are things like enormous amount of connectivity in the northeastern region, and then the fiber hubs that actually connect the west coast from the east coast. And one cool thing that we found in the map is that most of the infrastructure that we see in the constructed map is actually co-located with the existing right-of-way information like roadways and railways. Till the point we did the study, we actually have all these anecdotes that explained the co-location, but then we actually quantified this in our study, saying that around 85% of the infrastructure that we see in the internet today are actually co-located with the existing right-of-way. All right, given that we know how we can construct a reproducible map of the physical internet, let's see a problem that we found in the constructed map. So the problem is conduit sharing. And this arises because multiple ISPs, in order to save the deployment cost, they're going to share the conduit with other ISPs and then co-locate their fibers along the other ISPs in that conduit. And this is a serious problem because it arises this concept called shared risk. Because if one of these conduits is taken down because of an accident, all the ISPs who has a presence in that conduit are going to lose connectivity. And this is what we call as shared risk, and we analyze this problem of shared risk using risk matrix. So here is how we construct it. Consider a bigger ISP like level 3, and it has 3 conduits, C1, C2, and C3. And let's populate 1 to each of these conduits because level 3 has the presence in all these 3 conduits. And let's add a next map, say Sprint. And from the documents, let's assume that we find conduit C1 is shared by level 3 and Sprint. So the risk values for both level 3 and Sprint for C1 and C2 goes up by 1. But it remains the same for C3 because we don't have any evidence for the conduit sharing. And we repeat this process for all 20 ISPs, and we create this risk matrix. And then we apply 2 notions of risks on top of this risk matrix. The first one is called the connectivity only risk, which is just taking this risk matrix and asking various questions like who is doing most number of sharing, what is the average number of sharing in other ISPs network. And then the next notion is connectivity plus inferred traffic volume. So what happens to this risk picture when we augment this risk matrix with traffic volume on top of that? And that's going to be a visualization in this talk. All right, let's go to the first part, which is connectivity only notion. And the question we ask is, how many ISPs typically share a conduit? And to answer this question, we lay the number of ISPs sharing a conduit on x-axis and the raw number of ISPs sharing the conduits with other ISPs on y-axis. And then we count this number using risk matrix. So what this shows is that there are 542 conduits in the study that we considered, out of which 89%, 63%, and 53% are used by at least 2, 3, or 4 ISPs. And the most striking character here is that there are 12 critical choke points in the internet based on the data set that we have that is shared by at least 17 of them. And this is a very serious problem because if one of these 12 critical choke points had an accident or a cable cut, all those 17 ISPs will suffer because of that. And this also defeats the commonly assumed model of the internet in the topology studies that says that the physical connectivity actually is way more diverse. But what we show here is that the risk and the sharing is most common in ISPs, and that assumption does not hold at all. And the next question we ask is, which ISPs do the most infrastructure sharing? And to answer this, we have all the ISPs on x-axis and the average number of ISPs that shares its conduit or the fiber infrastructure with other ISPs in their network. And we counted again using the risk matrix. What we found here is that for major players like level 3, Starlink, Earthlink in terms of the cabling, they actually have a geographically diverse presence, and the average number of sharing with others is very less. But for the foreign networks like Tata, Telia, Deutsche, NTT, etc., they want to have presence in foreign territories. So what they're going to do is they're not going to typically build their own conduit, but they're going to have the help of other larger ISPs, and they're going to put their fiber into the conduit for those ISPs. And hence, they share a lot in the US. And what this also tells is that a majority of the ISPs typically do this to save deployment cost. It can save deployment cost for sure, yes. But when it comes to resilience in the network, it is actually counterproductive to share more in the internet. In terms of the diversity, we are suffering. All right, given that we know this is the shared picture, let's see what happens when we add volume on top of this map that we construct. So instead of traffic volume, we as researchers cannot go collect traffic into the internet, right? So what we do is, as a proxy for that, we're going to use traceroute that we collect from ONO project and layer that on top of the constructed map. And you have to note two things here. One is the thickness of all those conduits, as well as the color in intensity. So the thickness denotes here the number of probes traversing a particular conduit, which is the popularity of a particular route. And the color denotes the number of ISPs present in the conduit. So I'm going to stop this animation and explain you three quick things. One is, if you look at the west coast side of it, the thickness is very large, as well as the intensity of the color is actually very dark, which tells you two things. One is that the number of ISPs present in those conduits are high, as well as the popularity of those routes are also high because of the presence of submarine cables. But that's not the case in the middle. It is exactly opposite. But at the other side of the East Coast, right, the number of ISPs is very less because the thickness is high, but the color is less. So again, this could be explained because of enormous submarine cables connecting or emanating from those regions. And after adding all this information on top of this base map, what we found is that the number of ISPs and the sharing only increases even after this traffic volumes. All right, we know how to construct the map. We saw the problem in it. Next, let's see how can we actually improve the map that we have or reduce the problem that is shown by these maps. Right, that is what is taken care by the Robusta Solutions part of this work. And the goal here is to increase the robustness of the infrastructure to fiber cuts or to minimize the propagation delay that we see in the network. And for that, we provide two options to the ISPs, where the first option is the ISP is not willing to spend any money on new conduits, but then they're okay to peer with other ISPs. And the second option is the ISP is willing to spend money on digging their own new conduits so that they get a diverse geographical presence. Right, for the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about the first part alone, which is increasing network robustness without adding any new conduits into the network. So it's a simple optimization framework where we are trying to consider this graph and switch the most number of sharing conduits to the other ISPs by adding new peer points. Right? And that is what is captured by the shared risk reduction, which tells you the amount by which an ISP can reduce the sharing with other ISPs by peering with 3 new extra ISPs. So here's the graph that we see for all the ISPs that we consider in the study. So if you take Telia, for instance, it's going to get a SRR value of 13. That is a reduction in the shared risk in its in terms of the number of conduits by 13 when it peers with 3 new ISPs like AT&T, CenturyLink, and Level 3. But what is the cost that Telia is going to pay to achieve this number 13? And that is what we capture in this new metric, path inflation, which tells you the number of hops that Telia has to add in order to get this SRR reduction. And if Telia just has to add one minimal hop to either AT&T or Level 3 or to CenturyLink to achieve this SRR value of 13. All right. We know the process for constructing map, we know the problem of shared risk, and we now know how to mitigate the problem. So let's see what are the implications for a set of audience in the community. First, let's talk about the implication for policymakers. Title 2 is very hard because it enables FCC to specify providers as common carriers. And what happens when somebody is specified as a common carrier is that their infrastructure has to be made available to other third parties, including Google. And a recent decision that was made by FCC was that it reclassified all the broadband providers as common carriers. And an outcome of that is that the broadband carriers has to share its infrastructure to everyone, all the third parties. And this is kind of not agreeing with whatever we produce from our results, in the sense that if this classification is actually upheld, they have to share their infrastructure to others. And what we found is that sharing is not caring when it comes to physical diversity. So policymakers have to consider these bigger implications when they are creating such policies. And let's talk about the implications for ISPs. So our base map could actually do some awesome things for people sitting in this room, in the sense that you can make several decisions like provisioning, managing the infrastructure, as well as you can think about what are the set of new future deployments that you can make that is beneficial to the company, as well as it is risk and robust enough. And finally, it can also inform several regulatory insights, like what is the safest possible infrastructure location in my network, such that when something fails, I can use that as a backup. In a nutshell, it's going to expose many critical layers that are often opaque to many of the higher level measurement studies that people do. I'm going to talk about a case study that actually looks at this particular component, which is how do we gain competitive insight and decide on the new deployment location such that we actually maximize the number of users and minimize the cost in the deployment. And we articulated this framework more on the research aspect of this, because there is a strong body of research that shows the strong correlation between the economic productivity as well as the broadband connectivity. So our definition of broadband here is based on FCC's National Broadband Plan, and it is 25 Mbps download and 3 Mbps upload. So FCC also provides economic incentives to service providers to deploy at new locations. And our question is, how can service providers identify best locations for deploying infrastructure such that they can actually maximize the utilization? Because some of the objectives that service providers have is like no different from all the companies. They just have to maximize the shareholder value that they give to the company. So other benefits could include things like they want to grow revenues, expand the user base and service offerings, as well as they want to minimize the capital cost as well as the deployment cost. And finally, whatever they deploy into the network, they should consider this problem of minimizing risks, because it in turn implies both strategic and operational perspective for the network. So our solution to this problem is a techno-economic framework where we want to provide a decision support for making new broadband deployment targets. And we are casting this problem for broadband deploying alone. However, the solution that we say here can be applied to many other aspects of the problem. Say something like, what is the next best peering location that I can do in my network so that my network is robust and risk-free? And the framework considers different things like infrastructure proximity, what is the closest location that I have in terms of connectivity, demographics of the users, as well as the costs involved in each of these deployments. And in a nutshell, the question is identifying the highest concentration of the user base with minimum cost. All right. So here is a outcome of the study that we did. So the green ones denote all the counties that have some connectivity based on the Internet Atlas data set that I showed you earlier. And the red ones denote those counties that do not have connectivity. And the basic model here is basically a quadratic assignment model, which is an extension of Koopman-Beckman algorithm. And we implemented this in Python using a deep framework, and the objective, as I told you earlier, is to maximize the number of users and minimize cost involved. And for this study, we consider two models, which is upgrading the existing PSTN box, which is out there, or deploying new fiber. And for the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about the later one, which is how do we deploy new fiber from scratch? So here is an outcome of our study. So it is actually evolving from many solutions, and all these solutions are Pareto dominant and optimal. So an ISP can pick any of these solutions depending on the criteria, and each point represent a set of locations and the number of users covered based on those deployments, as well as the cost involved for that in millions. So here's the outcome of the fiber deployment that our framework can create. So it is deploying the fiber infrastructure along the right-of-way information, which is actually cleared and easy enough to use. And this minimizes the deployment cost, as well as minimizes the risk and maximizes the user concentration. With this, I'd like to conclude, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thanks for having me here. That's actually a very interesting point. I'm not aware of any of the studies, but then in this project of Internet at Rest, we are looking at the long haul portion of things and then how things get connected. However, as a follow-up work, we are actually looking at how metro connectivity can be done, as well as the last mile connectivity can be used as a data set along with whatever we have in this study. So that could be something that we want to do in future.
So that was part of my question. The other part is, have you done any thinking about looking at interconnection points and kind of that topology?
Connection points as in like ISPs?
Interconnection points, not so much the physical, but interconnects, colo spaces, things like that.
There was a study by Walter Willinger, and I think that paper is under submission. And that actually looks at interconnectivity and how things get connected at ISPs and how they can be improved. So you might want to take a look at that. We don't actually consider that in the study. Thanks. All right, thank you very much.